Hey everybody, this is Mr. Storm. In this video, we're going to talk about positioning. We want to make something that looks kind of like this week. We want to actually position our divs in our web page in a way where it kind of makes sense and everything is in its rightful place. And so we're going to discuss how to do that by talking about this concept of positioning. Let's go to positioning. Where are we? Okay, position property. So this is what we want to talk about. Positioning is really important, especially if we want a web page that actually is more dynamic than just stacked on top of each other. The position property specifies the type of positioning method used for a specific element in a web page. So the position property has five different values. It could be static, relative, fixed, absolute, or sticky. Let's talk about each of those. So the position static value basically means that the element acts exactly the way that it normally does by default. It's not positioned in any special way. It goes with the normal flow of the page. Everything we've built so far has been static. Then we have relative. Relative is a positioning value that determines where it's going to be positioned in relation to the other elements on the page. So setting the top, right, bottom, and left properties of a relatively positioned element will cause it to be adjusted away from its normal position. Other content will not be adjusted to fit into the gap left by the element. So here we have a position relative. We're going to set the left to 30 pixels, which it moves it over from the left 30 pixels. Then we have a fixed position. Now notice there's no example for the fixed position. That's because my face is covering it. This whole time, this element right down here has been, kind of displayed. This is a fixed position element. This element is fixed to the bottom right of the web page. Okay, now no matter how much I scroll or whatever I do, it's going to stay there. It stays in that position no matter what I do. All right, let's move my face back over. Okay. Then we have absolute. Absolute is positioned relative to the nearest positioned ancestor instead of positioned relative to the viewport, like fixed. However, if an absolute positioned element has no positioned ancestors, it uses the document body and moves along with the page scrolling. So what this means is that an absolute position will position itself inside the container it's contained within, in whatever way that it is called. I don't necessarily use absolute as much as I use some of these other options, but absolute is a thing that you can use. And then we have sticky. Sticky is kind of like the best of both worlds. Basically what sticky means is it will be relative at one moment and then fixed at a different moment depending on whether or not we've scrolled past that point. So if we take a look at this green box here, this is the element that we've applied stickiness to. Notice that if it's right here normally, but as I scroll, it's going to stick to the top of the screen as I scroll past that portion. So sticky is great for things like navigation bars at the top of the screen, stuff like that. Now elements will overlap. We can indicate which element should be on top of the other by setting this Z index value. So for example, with this image, we've set the Z index value to -1, so it's behind the heading. If we set it to let's go try it yourself. If we set it to a +1 and run it, then it comes on top of the text. So we can set a Z index value to push elements back in the layout of our website. We can position text within an image. There's all kinds of stuff we can do. All right. Width and max width we've talked about so far. We've talked about already. Just remember that margin auto will allow you to center items in the middle of the page. Width will allow you to keep a specific width, and max width will allow you to have a max width that element will grow to, but it will shrink if it gets smaller. Overflow, we can create scrolling text boxes by using overflow. That's fun. Let's talk about floating and clearing. Okay, so this is something that you're going to use a bunch whenever you're positioning. The float properly specifies how an element should float. Now, what floating means is that it'll be, think about it like, I can't think of a good metaphor here, but essentially if it floats left, then it's going to go to the left side of the screen. If it floats right, it's going to go to the right side of the screen, okay? So left elements float to the left of its container, right elements float to the right. Inherit means it basically grabs the float value of the item it's inside. So for example, this is an item that is, this picture here is floating to the right of this div, and the text kind of wraps around it. You can also have a picture floating to the left inside of a div. When you do no float, this is what it looks like, and it's really gross. Okay, so floating we're going to use a ton. Let's also talk about the different display styles. So there's inline, block, and there's block. So inline block, so let's think about it like this. Okay. Think about let's do this example. Okay. So normally a series of links will normally be, let's get rid of this really quickly. So normally a series of links would be stacked like this, right? Because they are full elements that take up the entire width of the page, and that's their normal behavior. But if we use this inline block value, this display inline block, it'll actually allow them to squish together on the same line, which is very, very helpful for like a navigation bar. So if we had a bar with navigation elements on it, we could do that. Alrighty. Horizontal and vertical aligns. This is really important for you to pay attention to. So if you want a text align center, if you want to set an image to be in the middle of a div, all kinds of stuff. So this is a good thing to look at. Let's see. Do we want to talk about combinators? We could. All right. Yeah, let's not talk about combinators. That gets a little bit too complicated. Alrighty. And that's fine too. So just remember with units, the difference between pixels and percent is pixels is a fixed amount that you're going to create, whereas percent is a percentage of the element that it's inside. Okay. That's about it. Go over these, the links that I've given you, go through them in more depth, read the articles, play around with the examples. Make sure you understand this stuff, because when we get into building the tutorial or building the template, it's going to be important that you understand these concepts and how they work. Okay, that is it for this lesson. I will see you in the assignment after you complete the quiz.